They said it started with a quiet decision made behind glass doors, the kind that never reaches the people it affects until it is already too late. And before going further, everyone watching is asked to comment where they are watching from and subscribe, because this story belongs to more people than anyone expected. When Marcus Holloway first heard that Jollibee was leaving the Atlanta Mall, he laughed, certain it was just another rumor born from online panic. Jollibee had lines that curled into weekends, laughter that echoed through tired hallways, and a steady rhythm of families that made the mall feel alive. Removing it felt impossible, almost disrespectful. Yet weeks later, the announcement arrived without ceremony, without explanation that made sense to anyone outside a boardroom. The franchise was no longer aligned with the mall's strategic direction, words so empty they sounded rehearsed. Marcus noticed something shift immediately, not in foot traffic, but in conversation. People stopped asking what was new and started asking what was wrong. It was the first sign of a collapse disguised as progress, and no one in charge seemed to notice or care. The mall had survived decades of competition, renovations, and economic downturns, largely because it understood one unspoken rule Marcus learned working security there for 8 years. People do not come for stores alone, they come for feeling. Jollibee was not just food, it was memory, especially for Filipino families who drove hours just to taste something familiar. When it disappeared, silence replaced chatter, and the silence spread faster than expected. Marcus began noticing shorter shifts, then fewer staff meetings, then entire days when escalators stopped running. Store owners whispered theories, blaming rent hikes, zoning disputes, or cultural bias, but none of it explained the speed of decay. Parents stopped bringing children. Teenagers stopped lingering. The mall's pulse weakened, and the management responded with optimism emails full of promises that never arrived. Marcus watched elderly couples wander through empty corridors looking confused, as if something personal had been taken from them. The loss of Jollibee became symbolic, like removing a heart and expecting the body to keep walking. People didn't protest loudly, they simply stopped coming, which proved far more devastating. Among those who stopped coming was Liza Fernandez, who had visited that mall every Sunday for 5 years without fail. For her, Jollibee was a ritual, not indulgence, a way to feel connected to home while raising children in a city that never slowed down. When it closed, she tried other restaurants, but the mall felt different, colder, almost hostile. Her children asked why it felt empty, why the place where birthdays once happened now felt like a waiting room. Liza noticed store clerks standing idle, watching phones, watching doors, watching nothing. The mall had become a space people passed through quickly rather than a destination. She stopped scheduling meetups there. Friends followed. Small habits quietly died, and with them, predictable revenue. Management replaced Jollibee with a temporary pop-up that sold novelty items no one wanted, hoping novelty would replace loyalty. It did not. Liza later learned 3 stores closed within 2 months of the change. None issued statements. They simply vanished, leaving behind dark windows and sale signs that never came down. Inside the mall's administrative offices, Daniel Whitmore believed numbers mattered more than emotion. He approved the lease termination, convinced that higher-end tenants would elevate the mall's image. His spreadsheets showed opportunity, not loss. What they did not show was absence. Within weeks, food court sales dropped across the board. The decline wasn't gradual, it was immediate and sharp. Other vendors complained, pointing out that Jollibee brought traffic they could never afford to generate alone. Daniel dismissed it as adjustment pain. He authorized cosmetic upgrades instead, brighter lighting, new banners, a rebrand campaign promising a modern retail experience. Customers were unimpressed. Marcus overheard shoppers calling it empty but shiny. Worse, the mall's anchor stores started renegotiating leases, using declining foot traffic as leverage. Daniel felt the pressure then, not from families or culture, but from contracts. He still refused to acknowledge the mistake publicly. Admitting error would mean admitting that community mattered more than margins. Privately, he began tracking vacancy rates with growing concern. Every empty storefront felt like a question he could not answer honestly. By the third month, the mall's decline became impossible to ignore. News blogs picked up the story, framing it as another example of cultural miscalculation in urban development. Comments flooded in from Filipinos across Georgia, sharing memories tied to that single restaurant. Some said it was where they felt seen for the first time. Others said it was where they brought relatives visiting from abroad. The mall issued a generic response about evolving consumer preferences, which only fueled anger. Marcus noticed security duties shift from crowd control to property protection. Fewer people meant more vulnerability, not less. Teenagers used empty wings to skateboard. Graffiti appeared overnight. Stores shortened hours. The mall once stayed open late because people wanted to stay. Now it closed early because no one cared. Liza drove past one evening and saw the parking lot half empty at dinner time, something she had never witnessed before. It felt unnatural, like a city square without voices. What vanished with Jollibee wasn't just customers, it was reason. The strangest part was how quickly people rewrote their routines. Humans adapt fast when disappointment becomes habit. Families found new gathering places. Churches organized potlucks instead of mall meetups. Filipino events moved elsewhere. The mall lost relevance quietly, which made recovery harder. Daniel proposed a new international food hall concept, ironically borrowing from what Jollibee already represented. Investors hesitated, citing the mall's reputation online. Once labeled empty, the name stuck. Marcus watched delivery trucks stop arriving. Maintenance budgets were cut. Broken tiles remained broken. Escalators stayed silent. The mall became a case study in how removal creates vacuum, and vacuum invites decay. Employees felt it first. Then tenants. Then the city. Tax revenue dropped. The mall stopped being discussed as an asset and started being discussed as a problem. Liza heard rumors it might be sold. Her children asked why their favorite place disappeared. She had no answer that felt fair. It was never about chicken or spaghetti. It was about belonging. By month 6, the mall was officially labeled underperforming, a term Daniel hated but could not fight. Corporate meetings grew tense. Blame moved sideways, never upward. Consultants were hired, each repeating what locals already knew but with polished slides. Community trust had been broken. Marcus considered quitting when his hours were cut again, but stayed out of stubborn loyalty, maybe nostalgia. He remembered when the mall felt like a town square, when weekends required extra security because laughter filled the corridors. Now echoes replaced noise. A local newspaper ran a headline asking whether removing Jollibee had emptied the soul of the mall. Daniel avoided reading comments. He knew the answer. Still, reversing the decision felt impossible. Pride is expensive. When a proposal to invite Jollibee back surfaced, executives dismissed it as weakness. They chose silence instead. Silence does not heal. It spreads. The mall continued losing tenants, each closure making the next easier. People did not mourn loudly anymore. They stopped expecting anything at all. Liza eventually stopped driving past the mall entirely. It made her sad in a way that felt unnecessary. She found a new routine, new places, new joy. That was the final blow. When customers emotionally move on, no renovation brings them back. Marcus noticed fewer familiar faces, then none. His job became lonely. He walked empty corridors during peak hours, wondering how something so full could become so hollow. Daniel received notice that the mall's ownership was considering redevelopment, code for demolition. He stared at the email longer than expected. All his data, all his projections, None of it captured what people felt. He thought of Jollibee for the first time not as a tenant, but as a signal he ignored. The mall did not fail because of e-commerce or trends. It failed because it misunderstood its own heart. Removing joy created absence, and absence created collapse. By the time anyone admitted it, the building was already empty, both physically and emotionally, a monument to decisions made without listening. The mall's story spread online, framed as a warning rather than nostalgia. Business forums dissected it. Cultural commentators debated it. Community leaders referenced it. Yet no official apology ever came. Daniel resigned quietly before the sale was announced. Marcus was laid off with severance that felt like closure without dignity. Liza heard the mall would be torn down and felt nothing but acceptance. The place had died long before paperwork confirmed it. Some stories end with outrage. This one ended with understanding. People realized that what they value cannot always be quantified, and what they remove matters more than what they replace. The mall once thought it was bigger than one restaurant. It was wrong. Jollibee had been the thread stitching everything together. Without it, the fabric unraveled. Nobile celebrative. No hero fixed it. Just consequences unfolding slowly, predictably, painfully. The emptiness became the final message, louder than protests could ever be. And in that silence, everyone finally understood what had been taken. Years later, the land sat fenced, waiting for something new, something profitable, something modern. Yet locals still referenced it by the mall's old name, not whatever future blueprint promised. Memory outlived structure. Marcus found work elsewhere but never forgot the lesson. Liza taught her children that places matter because people make them matter. Daniel avoided projects involving community spaces. He learned, too late, that alignment is not branding language, it is respect. The story continued circulating online, reshared whenever another culturally rooted business was removed for strategy. It became shorthand for preventable collapse. No plaques marked the site. No documentary se fiscally commissioned. But stories do not need permission to survive. They live in routines, in food, in decisions people remember next time. The mall was empty now, but its lesson was not. It warned that joy is infrastructure, culture is capital, and belonging is revenue you cannot calculate until it is gone. When Jollibee left, the mall didn't just lose a tenant. It lost its reason to exist. After the fences went up, conversations changed tone, shifting from disbelief to reflection, as if everyone involved needed distance to understand what had really happened. Community groups referenced the mall when discussing cultural spaces, using it as an example of how inclusion can quietly power economies. Marcus occasionally met former co-workers, and they spoke less about jobs lost and more about moments remembered, which said everything. Liza noticed new Filipino-owned eateries opening in different neighborhoods, thriving without malls, driven by intentional community building rather than foot traffic promises. The irony was impossible to ignore. What the mall dismissed as misaligned became the blueprint elsewhere. Developers scouting the fenced land talked only about zoning potential, never history. That omission was the loudest reminder. The site wasn't empty of value, only emptied of understanding. People stopped asking who was responsible and started asking how to avoid repeating it. The answer always returned to listening. When decision-makers stop hearing the people who give spaces meaning, decline becomes inevitable. The mall's fall was not dramatic, it was procedural. That made it more dangerous. It proved that collapse does not require catastrophe, only consistent disregard. The lesson settled slowly, but it settled deeply. Online, the story took on new life, condensed into threads, videos, and debates about cultural anchors in commercial spaces. Some dismissed it as coincidence, others as symbolism, but no one could deny the timeline. The mall's decline aligned too perfectly with the removal. Marcus watched one video late at night, surprised to hear strangers articulate what he had felt but never voiced. Liza shared an article with friends, not out of anger, but validation. Daniel avoided the discourse entirely, yet it followed him in consulting interviews, framed politely as lessons learned. He answered carefully, acknowledging complexity without admitting failure outright. Still, the truth pressed inward. Spaces fail when identity is stripped for aesthetics. The mall attempted reinvention without foundation, forgetting that relevance grows from recognition. Community is not built through replacement, it is sustained through respect. Each retelling sharpened the message. This was not about nostalgia or resistance to change. It was about removing something that worked without understanding why it worked. The emptiness that followed was not mysterious. It was logical. The only mystery was why it surprised anyone. As redevelopment plans stalled, investors hesitated, wary of inheriting a narrative already defined by loss. That hesitation spoke volumes. Reputation, once damaged, does not reset with construction. Marcus drove by one afternoon and saw weeds breaking through pavement, nature reclaiming what commerce abandoned. It felt fitting. Liza's children barely remembered the mall now, but they remembered the food, the laughter, the feeling of being welcome. That was enough. Daniel, reflecting alone, realized success metrics had trained him to ignore subtle signals. Joy had been one of them. When it left, everything followed. The mall had mistaken popularity for replaceability. It assumed loyalty was transferable. It was not. People did not follow the mall elsewhere. They followed meaning. Each closed storefront became a sentence in a story already written. There was no dramatic ending, only gradual erasure. And that erasure taught more than any recovery plan could. It revealed how fragile systems become when they undervalue culture. The mall's failure was not unique. It was just visible. That visibility turned it into a cautionary tale others could not ignore. Community leaders later referenced the mall when advocating for culturally rooted businesses, arguing they were not niche but essential. They cited economic data, but emotion carried the argument further. Marcus attended one meeting, listening quietly, recognizing pieces of his past framed as policy. Liza volunteered at a local festival celebrating Filipino heritage, noting how crowds gathered effortlessly when people felt represented. Daniel, reading industry reports, noticed a shift in language, more emphasis on authenticity, fewer euphemisms for displacement. The mall had contributed to that shift, unintentionally but permanently. Its absence became instructional. New developments nearby promised inclusivity up front, almost defensively. None mentioned the mall by name, yet its shadow remained. The lesson had entered professional memory. Remove belonging, and structures hollow out. Preserve it, and growth follows naturally. The mall tried to manufacture attraction without roots. That approach failed. Others adjusted accordingly. In that sense, the mall's end was not meaningless. It paid forward its mistake. Still, that did not restore jobs lost or spaces erased. Learning does not reverse consequences. It only prevents repetition. Years passed, and the fenced land became ordinary, blending into the background of daily life. People stopped pointing at it. They simply knew. Marcus found stability elsewhere but never again underestimated how small decisions ripple outward. Liza's family built new traditions, unconcerned with what no longer existed. Daniel shifted into advisory roles, emphasizing stakeholder engagement more than profitability, quietly correcting what he once dismissed. The mall lived on only in conversation, usually when someone proposed removing something insignificant. Someone would always respond with the same reference, and discussion would pause. That pause mattered. It meant the story still worked. The mall had lost everything tangible, but it left behind caution. Not every loss teaches, but this one did. It reminded people that commerce does not operate in isolation. Culture fuels it. When that fuel is removed, engines stall. The mall's emptiness was not sudden or shocking. It was patient, thorough, and final. That patience made it unforgettable. Long after demolition plans faded, the idea remained. Joy is not optional infrastructure. It is load-bearing. New generations learned the story secondhand, framed less as tragedy and more as principle. Professors mentioned it in urban planning courses. Entrepreneurs referenced it when choosing locations. Marcus heard his own words echoed back through others, reshaped but familiar. Liza smiled when she realized her children understood the lesson instinctively, without explanation. Daniel finally acknowledged it aloud in a seminar, not naming them all, but admitting that spreadsheets often miss the most valuable variable. Silence followed his statement, the kind where truth settles. The mall's downfall no longer needed outrage to stay relevant. It had matured into wisdom. That transformation gave it a strange dignity. Not redemption, but purpose. The space itself remained unused, but its impact expanded. People did not mourn it anymore. They referenced it. That distinction mattered. Mourning implies loss without meaning. Reference implies integration. The mall became integrated into collective understanding. It served as proof that community cannot be replaced by concept. Remove what connects people, and places collapse inward. Build with connection, and resilience follows naturally. Occasionally, rumors surfaced about bringing something back to the site, a mixed-use development, a cultural center, even whispers of Jollibee returning nearby. None materialized on that land. It felt symbolic. Some things cannot be undone where they were undone. Marcus believed that. Liza agreed. Daniel accepted it. The site had completed its role. Bringing joy back there would not erase what happened. It would simply move forward elsewhere. That realization marked closure. The mall's story no longer demanded correction. It demanded remembrance. The emptiness no longer felt accusatory. It felt resolved. People drove past without bitterness. They understood. Understanding is quieter than anger, but more durable. The mall had become an example, not an argument. That was its final form. Decisions made without listening lead to spaces that no one claims. Spaces no one claims do not survive. The chain is simple, unforgiving, and avoidable. That avoidability is what makes the lesson valuable. The mall did not fail mysteriously. It followed a path laid out by disregard. Others learned to choose differently. In conversations about development, someone would eventually say the words everyone recognized, and heads would nod. No one needed further explanation. The mall had entered shorthand. Marcus felt strange pride in that, knowing his daily walks through empty corridors had contributed to understanding beyond those walls. Liza felt peace, knowing what mattered to her had been validated publicly. Daniel felt humility, knowing experience had corrected theory. The story did not villainize progress. It refined it. Progress without people is decoration. Decoration does not sustain life. The mall tried to decorate itself into relevance. It failed. That failure sharpened future success elsewhere. The absence left behind was not a void but a boundary, marking where assumptions collapsed. That boundary guided others. Even competitors learned. They preserved what drew people rather than chasing abstractions. The mall's silence spoke louder than marketing ever could. In the end, no one asked why it closed. They asked why it mattered. The answer was consistent. It mattered because it forgot who it served. Remembering that ensured others would not. Time continued, indifferent but observant. The land remained, the lesson remained, and people adapted. Marcus rarely spoke about the mall now, But when he did, it was with clarity, not regret. Liza told the story once to a newcomer who wondered why so many avoided similar decisions. Daniel wrote about it privately, framing it as a turning point. None of them needed recognition. The outcome had spoken for itself. The mall's emptiness was never just physical. It was emotional, economic, and cultural. That combination made it instructive. Places fail all the time. Few failures teach this clearly. The mall's collapse aligned perfectly with its misjudgment, leaving little room for denial. That precision turned it into reference material. The story did not exaggerate. It didn't need to. Reality was sufficient. Removing something people loved created absence. Absence spread. Spread became decline. Decline became emptiness. Each step followed logically. Understanding that logic became the real legacy. The mall was gone. The reasoning endured. That endurance mattered more than any rebuilding effort could. In the end, the mall was remembered not for its stores or architecture, but for what happened when joy was dismissed as expendable. That memory outlasted the structure itself. Marcus carried it into every space he worked. Liza carried it into every tradition she preserved. Daniel carried it into every recommendation he made. None of them needed the mall restored. They needed the lesson respected. And it was. The story traveled quietly, embedded in better decisions, stronger communities, and spaces built with intention. The emptiness that followed Jollibee's removal was not random. It was the natural conclusion of a choice made without understanding. That understanding arrived too late for the mall, but just in time for others. And that is why the story still matters.